Hello friends, this is Sanjay. On the 30th of November of 2023, the Central Consumer Protection Authority, the CCPA, published a set of guidelines on the prevention and regulation of dark patterns. This was not surprising since several consumer protection authorities of various countries have published similar guidelines in the past. And the CCPA of India had started working on these specific guidelines earlier in 2023. The Department of Consumer Affairs and the Advertising Standards Council of India held consultations with stakeholders on the 13th of June. And a task force for working on these guidelines was constituted on the 28th of June, and the proposed draft guidelines were published in September 2023. The window for receiving views, comments and suggestions on these draft guidelines was open till the 5th of October, and the finalized version was published on the 30th of November. Since these are guidelines, are they mandatory or just discretionary? Can they be enforced? Well, in some previous cases, the Supreme Court has confirmed that when a government authority publishes guidelines or rules by exercising proper powers conferred by a statute or by the Constitution, then such guidelines or rules are justiciable. That is, they can be enforced. In this case, the CCPA has issued these guidelines by using the powers conferred by Section 18 of the Consumer Protection Act of 2019. Now, Section 18 clearly talks about the role of the CCPA in preventing unfair trade practices and preventing false or misleading advertisements. And since dark patterns can be considered as unfair trade practices or false or misleading advertisements, the CCPA has acted within the scope of the Consumer Protection Act. These guidelines are applicable on all e-commerce platforms. They may be selling goods or services, and also on advertisers and other sellers on such platforms. And the term platform includes websites, apps, and any other software. These guidelines have to be read, understood, and applied in conjunction with the Consumer Protection Act, the Consumer Protection e-commerce rules, and also the guidelines for prevention of misleading advertisements and endorsements of misleading advertisements. This is because, first of all, these guidelines have been created using the powers conferred by the Consumer Protection Act. And also, some of the terms used in these guidelines, such as advertiser, marketplace, e-commerce entity, platform, seller, are actually as defined in these other laws. Now the question is, what happens in case of contravention of these guidelines? Well, the draft version of these guidelines was more clear in this aspect, since it had this Section 8, which said that the provisions of the Act would apply in case of contravention of the guidelines. The Act being the Consumer Protection Act. But for some reason, this Section 8 has been dropped from the final version that is published in the Gazette. In any case, since these guidelines have been published by the CCPA under the Consumer Protection Act, it is logical to understand that any contraventions will be dealt with in the same way as how unfair trade practices or false or misleading advertisements are dealt with. Now, what are these dark patterns? Well, dark patterns are deceptive design patterns in the user interfaces of software, websites, and apps, which have been intentionally created to trick or to influence users into doing things that they would otherwise avoid. The definition section of the guidelines also explains what dark patterns are all about. And as I mentioned earlier, since it says that dark patterns will amount to misleading advertisements or unfair trade practices or violation of consumer rights, it also supports what I mentioned earlier, that contravention of these guidelines will be dealt with under the Consumer Protection Act, just like misleading advertisements or unfair trade practices. An example of a dark pattern is this website. As you can see, my intention was to download some software, but the website has this huge button that says download, and it does not clearly state what am I downloading. The actual download button for the software that I want is this small blue one. But this big fluorescent green button just says click and install, and if I do that, I will install some other questionable software that I don't want. In fact, this green button is part of an advertisement. And that fact is mentioned using the almost invisible small font, that too in a color that almost fades into the background. So this advertisement is using a dark pattern to trick me into downloading and installing a software that I don't actually want. The draft copy of the CCPA guidelines has 10 dark patterns. The final version that was published in the Gazette lists 13 dark patterns, and the guidelines mention that the CCPA may notify more from time to time. Let us take a look at the 13 patterns that are listed in the annexure to the guidelines, and you will realize that you have actually seen almost all of them at some point while using various websites or apps. False urgency, which essentially pressurizes users by making them feel that they are running out of time, or that things are getting sold out and they will miss out on the opportunity if they don't buy immediately. For example, some websites or apps may have countdown timers saying that a sale or an offer is going to end in the next few hours or the next few minutes. And many times, if you go back to the same website or the same app the next day or even after a week, you will see the same counter is still telling the same thing. So this is just a pressure tactic to push the buyer to complete a transaction immediately. And while booking hotels on some of these travel websites, you would have noticed messages stating that only one room left or only 2 rooms left. And in many cases, if you go back to the same website after you have booked that room, you will find that rooms are still available. So if the message originally said that there is just one room available and you booked that last room, then how come more rooms suddenly became available? A variation of this is to say that this is the last room left at this price. Well, this again, in most cases, is just a dark pattern pressure tactic. And if you go to websites for renting houses, you will find similar tactics there also. Like messages which pop up to say that 5 users are looking at this listing right now, which makes you feel that unless you close the deal immediately, you will lose it. The issue is that you have no way of verifying whether 5 people are actually looking at it or not. So this is a dark pattern that is created to put pressure on the buyer. Basket sneaking is also something that we see almost every day. If you try booking air tickets, it is only on the last page that you will realize that there is a convenience fee that is being added to the final price. Since there is no way of not paying that convenience fee, because it is definitely going to be added to the final price, so why not just show it upfront? Why show a lower amount first and then add these additional fees only at the end? Whatever is necessary for the purchase, it may be convenience fees, packing fees, handling fees, delivery fees, service fees, without which a user cannot complete the purchase, because these additional fees are definitely going to be added into the final price. So all such additional fees should be shown upfront and not as a last minute surprise at the time of checkout. Another example is, recently I received a 100% discount voucher for some product. So I installed that app, and when I tried to purchase the product, that is when I discovered that there is a convenience fee that is being added at the end. And this convenience fee was not mentioned anywhere earlier. This is not a tax. It is just a random fee that the company is adding, which means that the company is not really giving a 100% discount, and they did not have any intention of doing so. What they are doing is they are just using the carrot of a 100% discount to get users to register on the app, provide all the details, go all the way to the checkout page before adding this convenience fees. So that is a deceptive practice, because users would have spent so much time in the registration process and may not want to feel like they have just wasted all the time. Chances are that many users will just end up paying that convenience fee, thinking that this is a small amount. And of late, you will also see that many websites or apps add things like tips or donations or something like that into the final price, where the tick box is already enabled and you have to remember to untick it or deselect that option to avoid paying these extra fees. And in some cases, there is no way to disable these additional amounts. All these last minute additions into the final price are examples of basket sneaking. Confirm shaming is where specific phrases or words or images are used to psychologically pressurize users into paying extra for some other optional service. For example, when you book bus tickets or air tickets or train tickets, you will see that travel insurance is offered as an optional extra. Initially, the travel insurance option would be enabled by default, and many users would end up paying for it if they were not looking at the amounts carefully. It is only after many people started complaining about this that the insurance options are usually not enabled by default these days. But now they have moved to confirm shaming. Instead of just asking, do you want insurance or travel assistance, yes or no, statements like this are used. No, I will take the risk. This statement, I will take the risk, will cause at least some users to rethink. Maybe I should not take the risk. Maybe I should just pay this little extra amount. So this is a psychological dark pattern to pressurize the users into buying an optional service. Another website wants users to provide their email ID for a newsletter, obviously for marketing purposes. Instead of just providing a link or a button saying no thanks or a simple X on the top corner to close the pop-up, they use confirm shaming text like this. No thanks, I prefer to pay the full price. So these are examples of confirm shaming dark patterns because they are designed to cause the users to feel shame or to question their decision when they are about to say no to an optional extra service. Forced action. This is another irritation that you would have noticed mostly on apps. For example, when you are buying a smartwatch, you may not realize that you need to have an app installed on a smartphone to even activate and start using the watch. And that app will not work unless you enable a whole load of permissions. First of all, why make it mandatory to validate your phone number for a smartwatch app? If a user doesn't want to create an account or doesn't want to upload their data into the app, then the watch should at least work with its basic features. How many steps you have walked? What is your heart rate? These are functions that don't require the watch or the app to have access to your contacts. So why do almost all smartwatch apps require a whole load of permissions? These apps are forcing the user to take a specific action to use something that they have already bought and paid for. So this is forced action. If you are installing a finance related app, just check the permissions it requires and you may be surprised. I just checked the permissions required by a finance and investments related app. Thankfully, not an Indian app. And I was surprised to see the kind of information they wanted about their users. Since this is a payment related app, why would they want to know about the user's race, ethnicity, political or religious beliefs and sexual orientation? If this app were to ever come to India, I would not be surprised if they asked users to upload their Janam Kundalis as well. A subscription trap is when websites or apps offer some kind of free trial and force people to provide payment details. And usually they even validate the credit cards with a 1 rupee or a 2 rupee charge, even to just make use of the so-called free trial. And if that free trial is for a longer period, like 3 months or 6 months or 1 year, then people may even just forget about the app or the service completely because they may have even stopped using it by then. And after the trial period ends, users are not told in advance that they are about to be charged. If you forget to cancel the subscription before the free trial ends, you may be charged a considerable amount for the entire next year or so with no refund option. Also, on some websites or apps, the cancellation process is intentionally designed to be so difficult or so tedious that you have to go through many screens and keep saying, I want to cancel before you actually reach the final cancellation screen. And sometimes even after requesting cancellation, they will say that the cancellation will be processed within 7 days or 14 days. So if your next billing is due within those 7 days or 14 days, you will get charged for the next 1 year or so. So this is a subscription trap to force people into paying for subscriptions that they do not want, either by billing them without advance notice or by making the cancellation process intentionally difficult. Interface interference is situations like when you get these pop-ups on apps or websites which sometimes do not have an X button to close them, and they force users to see the advertisements in the pop-ups. And these pop-ups will disappear only after a countdown. Or there is an X button, but it is not easily visible on the pop-up. It may be hidden in some corner of the screen like this. Or it may use colors that make it difficult to find. Or it may be intentionally designed to be unresponsive for at least some period of time. And also these type of pop-ups which are very common, where there is no button to simply say no. It wants to keep asking me later. And the button itself is in such light grayed out colors that it seems to be disabled. and at least some users may end up clicking on the brighter, more visible button and enabling or downloading something that they don't want to. Sometimes clicking on the X button may open one more pop-up, and people may think that they must have accidentally clicked outside the X by mistake. But this is not so, because this X button is intentionally designed to open one more pop-up when the user tries to close the first pop-up. These are some examples of interface interference. Bait and switch is not so common. It is when a website or an app advertises a popular product as being available and makes the user go through the purchase process, including entering the delivery address, the credit card details, etc. And at the final step, the system says that the product is no longer available and an alternative product may be offered. Because the user has already spent so much time and entered all the details, there is a likelihood that the user may just end up purchasing the alternative product. Or this may also just be a way to collect user details for marketing purposes, even though the product is not available at all. The last time I remember seeing something like this was a couple of years ago on a website that sells commercial or industrial products. This bait and switch is a tactic that is usually used by very shady apps or websites. Drip pricing is again something that you would have experienced. A good example is while booking air tickets. Initially, you are shown a price, and then when you go to the final page, there is a significant convenience fee that is added on. When the app or the website or even the airline already knew that a convenience fee is mandatory, why not make it more transparent and show the entire amount? Why show a lesser amount in the beginning and add the extra amount just before the payment? And even after you have purchased a ticket, you have to pay extra for selecting the seats. Most of the seats are paid seats if you want to choose. And the free seats that you can choose are only around the 10 middle seats in the back of the plane. If you want a window seat or an aisle seat, or if you want to ensure that the people you are traveling with are sitting together, especially if you are traveling with your family or traveling with small children, then you have no option but to pay. If you don't pay, you will be auto-assigned a seat a couple of hours before the boarding time, and it may be random, because if people have already paid for the window seats and the aisle seats, the only remaining seats will be the middle seats, and your family may have to sit like this. So drip pricing is where extra fees or charges are added drop by drop in various stages during the purchase process and sometimes even after the purchase. Disguised advertisements are something that I have been seeing quite frequently these days on food delivery apps. When you search for a dish, you will see a list of restaurants, and if you choose to rank these restaurants by rating or by delivery time, you will see that there are some lower ranked restaurants that also appear on the list, or some restaurants that are quite a distance away from your house will also show up on the list. Now, why are these random restaurants appearing in your list? Well, if you pay attention, you will see that there is a small light gray box or light colored text somewhere in the corner that will say that these are ads. If you don't pay attention, you may go ahead and order from these restaurants. Even in your social media screens, you will see advertisements are included between the posts. These are usually called promoted posts or something like that. These are just advertisements which are made to look like normal posts. Even some complete articles on websites or newspapers are advertisements. They are usually marked as advertorials. On some websites, you will see phone reviews or reviews of some other products that are designed to look like normal articles or reviews. But somewhere in an inconspicuous manner, they may have mentioned that this is a paid article or a brand promotion. So if advertisements are not clearly marked as such and they are disguised to look like other content, then these are disguised advertisements. Nagging is when an app or a website repeatedly keeps asking you to sign up for a newsletter or make a purchase or allow notifications. If you look at this example, there is no option to say no. It is only ask me again later. The idea here is that if users are regularly nagged with this pop-up, eventually they may click yes out of frustration or just to get rid of this pop-up. More recently, I had installed some fitness tracker app on an Android phone, and it randomly kept asking for GPS access, Bluetooth access, or messages access, or notifications access. And I accidentally clicked yes at least once for something before realizing it and uninstalling the app. So, nagging users can sometimes lead to users unintentionally providing information or allowing permissions that they otherwise would not want to. Trick question does not always mean a question. It can just be confusing or vague language that misleads the customer. For example, users normally expect an "I agree to terms and conditions" tick box while signing up for an app or a website. But here, this is actually adding something more. There is the regular "agree to terms and conditions" wording here. So this tick box is actually asking you to allow your details to be used for offers, products and services, which are most likely from third parties. Since not many people will actually click on the privacy policy or the terms and conditions, such intentional usage of vague language or trick questions may lead to the users agreeing to unnecessary things. SaaS billing is software as a service billing, where the users are charged on a regular basis, either monthly or annually, for some service or feature. Sometimes the user may not actually be using that feature in the first place. Many websites or apps may offer 3 months free or 6 months free, but they may also have some small print in the terms and conditions, which says that after this trial period, or if you exceed certain limits, you will be charged some amount monthly or annually. Many people tend to forget about this after a while, and in some cases they may have stopped using that app or the service itself, but they did not actively go through the process of cancelling the subscription or the annual billing. And suddenly one day you will see some amount being charged to your credit card, and that's when you realize that you forgot about that app or you are no longer using it in the first place. And even if you try to go and cancel it at that time, you have already paid for 1 year. Reputable websites or apps will tell you a month or at least 15 days in advance that you will be charged and that you have an option to cancel. It is usually the shady apps or the shady websites that will not inform you at all, with the very intention that you will not notice the amount that they are charging you. Rogue malware, such as ransomware or scareware, is typically something that is not a dark pattern in that sense, because it is an outright crime and covered under the IT Act and the IPC as well. The best example of a dark pattern that I can give you in this context is some of the antivirus programs that have free versions. These programs occasionally keep showing pop-ups stating that it found privacy issues or system issues or driver issues that need to be fixed immediately. If you click on proceed, it will ask you to buy a paid version. So it is essentially working as a scareware to scare users into making a purchase. So these were the 13 dark patterns as per the CCPA guidelines. There are several more types of dark patterns which the CCPA will probably add into the list sometime in the future. If you have any questions or feedback, post a comment below. And thank you for your like, share and subscription. We will meet again in the next video. Take care and Jai Hind.